shouted goodbye and I, bye, love you, Mum. When she was gone, that's the last time I saw her.
The majority of people who struggle with learning disabilities just want to live a normal life as they can, given the already challenging circumstances they are in. What occurs then when they are unable to distinguish between a genuine body and a genuinely terrible person? Unfortunately, 5 dreadful individuals did use a very vulnerable woman in this tragic case from the UK, and they then proceeded to do some really awful things to her. Please prepare yourself, okay? Let's take a look at this disturbing case. Gemma Hayter was a highly dependable person in her mid-20s. In the UK, she played rugby. Her family had always been aware of how she was different, somewhat from her classmates, and had a suspicion she was autistic. But despite several tests and attempts to help Gemma, none of the organizations had ever legally identified her as having a learning problem. This made it very challenging for Gemma to receive genuine assistance. She frequently battled with knowing when to shower and groom herself. She was also quite trustworthy, as I previously stated. She was raised in a somewhat happy environment, but as she grew older, she was utterly frantic to leave the house and established her own independence.
I didn't come here very often because I didn't like the idea of knocking on the door and perhaps saying, well, you're not coming in, and I really didn't want to know what state the flat was in. She just didn't keep that tidy, clean or tidy. It started smelling, it was horrendous, really bad. When she first moved in, I cleaned it from top to bottom, and my mum gave her a 3-piece suite, and she had a beautiful old pine wardrobe that was given to her. She had everything. She had a television, a stereo, all the CDs, DVDs and everything for a DVD player and that. And when she died and I saw it, she got hardly anything. Probably got taken, or somebody said, oh, I like that, and she just gave it to me. Even though she never admitted it, I don't think she could have been very happy here. The only thing she was glad about was the fact that she'd got her independence and she could do what she wanted to do when she wanted to do it. I know I wouldn't have wanted to live here under any circumstances.
Her family was concerned about this, but they ultimately consented. They couldn't really stop her anyhow because she was an adult. By that point, Gemma moved away in her mid-20s and into a modest council-owned apartment in a tower. Though she would never allow them to come see her, her family assumed she was doing okay. The lifeless body of Gemma was later discovered on August 9, 2010, along some abandoned railroad tracks by a jogger. Because what occurred to her seemed so unusual, the police opened an investigation. The time it took to identify the person who had injured her was short. See, the house Gemma had moved into was a place that also served as a new house for dealers and ex-convicts. In basic terms, she was surrounded by numerous people who were good at identifying those who were weak and easily vulnerable. Gemma had no way of knowing that they were bad people. She was really pleased to have a group of friends to hang out with. These so-called buddies were Daniel Newstead, Chantel Booth, Joe Boyer, Jessica Lannis, and Duncan Edwards. They had been persuading Gemma to steal some stories and use her welfare payments to make purchases for them. They forced her to store narcotics in her apartment, which they said were presents. She only did all of that because she believed they were her best friends. She wanted to be nice to them. But all of a sudden, the terrible situation became awful. On August 7, 2010, a Saturday night, all 6 of them had been attempting to enter a nightclub. Gemma had now jokingly said that Chantel wasn't old enough to enter. This indicated that the club had turned them away. Chantel and Jess assaulted Gemma and shouted at her out of frustration. Gemma then went back home. The assault started the next day when Gemma went to Chantel's house to pick up her bag. But that was a terrible trick. This is where all goes horribly wrong.
First day I went to court, sat up in the gallery, and they started reeling off what happened to her. One of the worst days of my life. Horrendous. Horrendous.
So here goes. When Gemma arrived at their place, they immediately began to harm her. They bound her face with masking tape, placed pee in a beer can, and had Gemma swallow it under pressure. Her nose was broken when she was slammed into a radiator. Then they beat her up with a mop, flushed away her phone, and imprisoned her in a tiny bathroom. They led her away from Chantel's residence after this repulsive treatment. You can see that they are all wearing sporting hoodie shirts on the CCTV film of her final minutes. Gemma is holding a white bag while rubbing her still bleeding nose. Personally, I believe that they appear to be concealing their faces while preparing their next move. August probably didn't get that chill. They claim to be simply walking her home.
They pretty much tortured her for several hours. Her head was bounced off a big industrial-style radiator because all of her blood was up the radiator and up the wall. They walked her all the way through Rugby Town, told her that they were walking her home, and she believed them. Her nose was actually broken in the flat, which is why in the CCTV footage when she's walking towards the camera, you can see her with a tissue blotting her nose. Gemma would have been like breathing a sigh of relief, you know, only got to get around the corner, only got to get around the corner. And then said that they would take her down the railway bank to cut across to her house, which would be correct if when they got down onto the railway bank, they turned left. But they got down on the railway bank and turned right.
Very friendly, right? But this was a complete lie as well. Instead, shortly before they arrived, the gang made a U-turn and headed towards an abandoned railroad track. Keep in mind that Gemma probably followed along since she didn't fully comprehend what they were doing or why anything was occurring. They were her friends, and as far as she was concerned, they had no motive to hurt her. They turned around when they reached the railroad bank. Gemma had a garbage liner placed on her head by the sickos. They stabbed her in the back and stomped on her skull. Then for some reason, they also attempted to burn Gemma's whole wardrobe. Gemma ultimately drowned in the blood from her fractured nose. I have no idea how it must have felt. Who would ever do this to someone as weak and kind-hearted as Gemma? The family was devastated. When it was discovered that Gemma's niece had gone to school with several of the adolescents who did this, she was very shocked.
This is where Gemma died, here. A horrible place to lose your life in the middle of the night, you know? It broke my heart. All I could think was, why would you do something like that? She had learning difficulties, she was very vulnerable. Even though they did that to her, I'm quite sure that if she survived it, she'd have forgiven them.
Despite the fact that Chantel and Jess were people she had avoided at all costs, she just couldn't believe they were able to pull it off. But even after being apprehended by the police, the gang didn't even appear to be remorseful. They acted as though the entire arrest was a joke, even laughing and acting foolish in front of the judge. One of them even anticipated going to jail because she believed she would get a PlayStation and a DVD player and be able to watch movies all day. They were each handed sentences ranging from 13 to 21 years after being all found guilty of a disability hate crime in 2011. In the UK, life usually refers to something similar. It also appears rather light, to be honest. Before they even turn 40, they'll probably be released. It's difficult to find the words to describe how horrible your behavior was, the judge even told them, calling this case a chronicle of heartlessness. Even though Gemma had never had an official handicap diagnosis, it didn't make any of it any better. If so, a social worker or other extra care that she really needed would have been provided. When Gemma was in her mid-20s, the council decided to check once more to see if she needed assistance with living alone. The man who conducted the assessment said she was fine to fend for herself, but her family wasn't convinced that the assessor did a very good job. Gemma even wrote to the council services a year or so before she died away to ask for assistance with cleaning her house. Recall how I stated she needed to be reminded to keep herself clean as she grew up? Well, while she was living alone, her place was an awful mess. It's understandable why she would never allow her mother inside. I suppose because she wished to maintain her independence. But as you can see, it was a total disaster. Many other authorities also fell short in assisting her. It's still a terrible problem, and attacks like these target the weak. Sadly, it was noted in 2018 that since 2011, crimes against persons with disabilities in the UK had increased by 300%.
And I don't know, the whole thing was just so sad. Her life was just so shit all along. So for her to die in such a... It's just everything about it horrible.
Nikki, Gemma's sister, recalled confronting several teens who were harassing a homeless guy with mental health concerns in a video she posted around 5 years later. Nikki is still striving to stop this from occurring to anybody else. The 3 men she spoke with appeared to be considering what they had done. She sincerely hoped that she was able to reach some of them, and I likewise hope so. The most absurd thing is that Gemma's mother thinks her daughter would have completely forgiven the barbarians who committed this horrible act.
A black bin liner was put over Gemma's head, and then again she got beaten up badly. She got stabbed once in the back, and somebody stamped on her head. There was a footprint on her head. They stripped her naked and left her lying there, face down, and took her clothes and put them in a black plastic bag, and took it a bit further down that way and tried to set light to it.
Gemma deserved a better life without a doubt, but no one should have to endure that at the hands of a group of individuals who were obviously evil and perverted. A campaign to dissuade gangs from abusing vulnerable individuals in their homes has been launched in the UK. An independent non-profit in the UK called Crime Stoppers is making an effort to assist. What do you think about this case? Did the group receive a fair punishment, and could Gemma have been protected from them by anyone? Please share your opinions in the space below.